The sun-drenched gardens of the Sarasota Art Academy were more than just a landscape. They were a living, breathing testament to order and beauty. Hidden amidst the vibrant hibiscus, towering palm trees, and perfectly manicured lawns, Elias worked in a world of soil and silence. At 70 years old, his skin had become like weathered leather, etched with the lines of 1,000 seasons. His hands, perpetually stained with the dark earth of Florida, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. To the elite faculty and the ambitious, young art students who hurried past him with their expensive canvases, Elias was simply a part of the scenery, the man who trimmed the hedges and ensured the fountains flowed smoothly under the punishing heat. But Elias carried a secret buried deeper than any seed he had ever planted. 30 years ago, the name Elias Thorne had been whispered in the prestigious galleries of New York, London, and Paris. He had been a titan of the contemporary art world, a man whose paintings didn't just capture life, they seemed to vibrate with it. He possessed a legendary technique for capturing the hidden light, the way sunshine looks when it hits moving water or the way a shadow stretches across a face in grief. Critics called his work miraculous. However, at the very zenith of his fame, a quiet tragedy struck. A neurological condition, subtle at first but increasingly persistent, caused a permanent tremor in his right hand. For a man whose entire existence was built on surgical precision with a brush, the tremor was more than a medical condition. It was a death sentence for his soul. Unable to produce the perfection he demanded of himself, Elias did the unthinkable. He destroyed his final, unfinished masterpieces, burned his journals, changed his last name, and walked away. He chose the garden because plants didn't judge his shaking hands. They only asked for water and care. One humid Tuesday evening, as a thick, bruised purple thunderstorm began to roll in from the Gulf of Mexico, Elias was finishing his rounds near the North Studio. This building was the sanctuary for the Academy's most gifted students. It was supposed to be empty by now, but a single window on the second floor was glowing with a harsh, flickering neon light. Curiosity, a trait he thought he had buried long ago, led him up the creaking stairs. He pushed the heavy oak door open, and the sharp, nostalgic scent of turpentine and linseed oil hit him like a physical blow to the chest. It was the smell of his former life. Inside, Maya, a 22-year-old student from a humble background in the Florida Keys, stood before a massive, 7-foot blank canvas. She was at the Academy on a full scholarship, carrying the hopes of her entire family on her shoulders. But tonight, she looked defeated. The final exhibition was only days away, the event that would determine her future, her funding, and her career. The assignment was The Portrait of Regret, and Maya was staring at the white void as if it were an abyss. Elias watched from the doorway as she picked up a charcoal stick, touched it to the canvas for a second, and then let out a cry of frustration. She threw the charcoal across the room, where it shattered against the brick wall. She collapsed onto a wooden stool, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Elias stepped into the light, his heavy boots sounding out of place on the paint-splattered floor. "The canvas isn't your enemy, Maya," he said softly. His voice was like the rustle of dry leaves in autumn. Maya jumped, startled, quickly wiping the tears from her red-rimmed eyes. "Elias? I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone was still here. I was just leaving." "You were leaving because you were looking at the white space and seeing nothing," Elias said, walking toward the center of the room. He picked up the broken piece of charcoal with his trembling hand. "But white isn't nothing. It is the beginning of everything. You are trying to paint regret like it's a person's face. You are trying to find a nose, an eye, a mouth. But regret isn't a face." Maya looked at him, confused. "Then what is it?" "That's the assignment. A portrait." Elias walked to the large window as a flash of lightning illuminated the garden below. Regret is a shadow that lingers long after the light has moved on. It is the weight of the air in a room after someone has left it forever. If you want to paint regret, stop trying to paint a human being. Paint the space that the human being left behind. For the next 6 hours, As the rain hammered against the glass and the wind howled through the palms, the world of the gardener and the student merged. Elias didn't pick up a brush. He knew he couldn't control the lines. Instead, he became a master of perception. He sat beside her and taught her the geometry of grief. "Don't use the expensive oils yet," he commanded. "Take the dirt from my gardening bucket. Mix it with the black ink. Feel the grit. Regret isn't smooth, Maya. It's abrasive. It's messy." Under his guidance, Maya began to work with a raw, frantic energy she had never felt before. She stopped worrying about the rules of the academy. She smeared the dark, muddy mixture onto the canvas with her bare hands. She used a palette knife to scratch jagged lines into the surface, creating textures that looked like scars. "I can't get the light right," she whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion at 4 a.m. Elias stood behind her, his eyes fixed on the canvas. He began to tell her a story, not about himself, but about a friend he once knew. He described a man who had everything and lost it to a shaking hand. "He thought the tremor was his end," Elias whispered. "He spent years hating his body for betraying him. But he realized too late that the tremor was actually a gift. It was the universe telling him to stop being a surgeon of the soul and start being a human being. Perfection is a cage, Maya. Truth lives in the cracks." Inspired by his words, Maya took a sponge and dipped it into a pale, sickly yellow, the color of a fading memory. She dragged it across the dark, muddy center of the painting. Suddenly, the image transformed. It looked like a figure standing in a doorway, half dissolved by the light, reaching for something that wasn't there. As the dawn began to break, turning the sky a pale, bruised violet, Maya stepped back. The canvas was no longer a void. It was a masterpiece of movement and emotion. It was a portrait of a woman looking into a mirror, but the reflection was a blur of gray and gold, the perfect representation of a life spent looking backward. The day of the exhibition arrived. The gallery was filled with wealthy donors and sharp-tongued critics. Maya's painting was the centerpiece. When the curtain was pulled back, the room went dead silent. It wasn't the kind of silence that precedes a polite applause. It was the silence of people who had been struck in the heart. Maya won the grand prize. But when she looked through the crowd for the man who had helped her, he was nowhere to be found. She ran out to the gardens, still wearing her formal dress, and found Elias near the rose bushes, his hands back in the dirt. "They loved it, Elias," she cried, breathless. "They want to know who my mentor was. They're calling it a thorn-like masterpiece. They think I've discovered a lost technique." Elias looked up, a small, peaceful smile on his face. He didn't say that he was the thorn they were talking about. He had watched his soul live again through her work, and that was more than enough. "I'm just the gardener, Maya," he said, turning back to his roses. "I just know how to make things grow in the dark."